Hello and welcome to the Atlas Agency, where we investigate the Arkham Horror living card game. In this video, I'll be reviewing the Curse of the Rougarou, which is a print-on-demand standalone scenario for the Arkham LCG. Hope you enjoy! Before we get started, if you're not familiar with the differences between these print-on-demand standalone products and the regular Arkham releases, I would encourage you to stop and go check out my review video for the Carnival of Horrors standalone scenario first. In that video, I give a detailed explanation for this category of expansion. It's important stuff to know if you're looking at Rougarou, but I don't want to repeat it all every time I do a review on a standalone. So again, if you're not familiar, go check out that Carnival of Horrors video first and then circle back here. Curse of the Rougarou was the first standalone scenario to be released for the Arkham LCG, and really it was the first expansion of any kind for the game. It got a limited early release alongside the core set at Fantasy Flight's Arkham Knights event at their headquarters in October 2016, about a month before the full retail release of the game. Everyone who attended that event got a copy, so it was briefly an exclusive, but only very briefly. It got its regular retail release in November, right on the heels of the core set, followed the core set by just about a week. In the Curse of the Rougarou scenario, the investigators are tipped off to a series of strange killings down in the New Orleans, Louisiana area. A voodoo priestess is claiming the killings are the work of a cursed creature called a Rougarou, which is a sort of Cajun folklore version of the werewolf. So the investigators hop on a train, they head south, and they start to go look into the rumors to find out whether there's any substance to them. As a side quest, Curse of the Rougarou is a very cheap ticket, costs you just 1 experience point per investigator to slot it into your campaign as a side quest, or you can play it on its own in standalone mode. Curse of the Rougarou, for me, falls sort of in the middle of the road. While I wouldn't say that it's one of my favorite Arkham scenarios, I do think that it's fairly enjoyable, and it does some neat and unique things. I want to touch on some of the things I do appreciate about the scenario, and then I'll touch on just a few areas where I see flaws. In terms of the gameplay, Curse of the Rougarou is a fairly good scenario that has several neat things going for it. As with all the standalone scenarios, Rougarou's encounter deck doesn't reuse any cards from any other releases, so everything you run into when you're playing this scenario will be specific to Rougarou. That means that it has enough card space to really provide a unique and coherent experience. Among Rougarou's high points are a nice variability that contributes to its replay value, a memorable enemy for you to face off against, and also a strong theme. I think the biggest thing that Rougarou has going for it is basically its accessibility as a side quest. If you're interested in playing a side quest during a campaign, then as of the time of this recording, you only have 2 options, and of those 2, I think Rougarou is definitely easier to work in. Part of that is that it only costs 1 experience per investigator to play, compared with 3 for the Carnival of Horrors scenario. So you stand a pretty good chance at recovering that experience, or even probably getting a net gain, especially if you're packing the player card Delve Too Deep, which lets you earn extra experience. Also, the scenario itself is not too hard, so you stand a good chance at succeeding and coming out of it better off than you went in. So again, if you want to have a campaign side quest available, I think that Rougarou is your best option. The Rougarou itself, I think, is definitely a memorable enemy. He's the star of the scenario, and there isn't really another enemy quite like him currently in Arkham. As a standalone, the scenario gets a higher than usual count of unique encounter cards, and a good number of those directly touch on the Rougarou and help build up his presence in the scenario. I will say that it can feel a little odd when you draw too many of the cards that deal with the Rougarou back to back, especially in multiplayer, or if they start to surge into each other. The Rougarou just gets a little too hyperactive, and I start to hear that Benny Hill kazoo chase music queuing up in the background. Another cool thing about Rougarou is its variable setup. So each of the scenario's location cards falls into one of 4 little sets, each representing a different area of New Orleans or its surroundings. During setup, you'll randomly pick one of these sets to be the area that's in play when you start the game. You'll pick another set at random to remove from the game entirely, not to be used at all that play, and the remaining 2 sets come into play later in the mission. That adds a lot of variability and ups the replay value. Each of the areas has its own tools to help you deal with the scenario, so from one play to the next, your options will be different, and you may have to tweak your plans based on which locations you have available. There's also more than one way to win the scenario. That raises the replay value as well. The last positive I want to mention is the theme. I think the overall theme and story of Curse of the Rougarou are interesting within the context of the Arkham Horror game, because although there's flavor text that links the Rougarou back to the mythos, as well as some more Lovecraftian monsters sprinkled in the deck, on the whole, the werewolf theme feels more like a traditional horror theme, as opposed to, say, the extra-dimensional terrors of Dunwich, and I think that makes for a nice change of pace. It's just a little outside Arkham's usual pattern, even though, again, there are those mythos elements mixed in. I think a side quest like this is a good place for the game to explore some slightly different thematic ground like this. So those are some of the things I think Rougarou does well. As far as weaknesses, the one that stands out to me the most is that there's a sort of, I want to call it a loophole that lets some investigators really skirt part of the main challenge of the scenario if they have access to a certain kind of card effect. I think the difficulty level for Rougarou is generally fine for most investigators, but without getting into specifics, for the Guardian class and also for at least one other non-Guardian investigator, you can really sort of cheese through the scenario without too much trouble if you have the right cards, especially in solo. The good news is that this mainly only helps with one of the two possible endings, so you can always force yourself to go for the other road. Also, if you're playing this as a side quest, with all the other stuff your campaign's going to throw at you, maybe you won't mind having this be on the easier side, but I think it definitely hurts the scenario's value in standalone mode. I mentioned earlier that I appreciate the scenario's werewolf theme. I think it handles that theme pretty well. However, there is a second side to the theming on this one which I think doesn't get serviced as well, and that's the setting. This may be nitpicking somewhat, but I just don't think the New Orleans setting comes through very strongly in this scenario. There are a few touches here and there, but overall the setting feels underutilized, and I would have liked to have seen it defined a little better. Also, some of the location and treachery artwork, especially some of the swamp stuff, I think feels pretty bland. I think Carnival of Horrors did a much better job of establishing a strong setting, and that was an asset for the Carnival scenario. So all in all, I think that Curse of the Rougarou is an okay expansion, generally enjoyable despite a few issues, and probably somewhere near the middle of the pack of the current Arkham scenarios. However, if I were prioritizing all the current Arkham releases, I would probably rank Rougarou last. I think it's more valuable to pick up all of the Dunwich Mythos packs first, although I would rank some of the Dunwich scenarios individually below Rougarou as scenarios. The Mythos packs are all elevated by the fact that they contain new player cards, and also by the fact that they weave into that larger campaign. Weighing Rougarou against the Carnival of Horrors standalone, I definitely think Carnival of Horrors is the stronger scenario, especially for standalone play. However, I still suspect that Rougarou's lower experience point cost and gentler difficulty probably make it a slightly better purchase if you're really wanting to have a campaign side story. And that wraps this review up. For more Arkham content, including my written scenario guide covering all the currently released Arkham expansions and scenarios, please visit the Atlas Agency blog over at atlasofarkham.wordpress.com. Your feedback is also greatly appreciated. You can drop me a line on BoardGameGeek as user TheAtlas, that's TheAtlas, or comment here on this video or on the blog. And as always, thanks for watching.